Protesters are on the streets of Boston rallying against the so-called free speech rally that's expected to draw right-wing extremists. We'll have the latest on the dueling protests when Ames returns.
You were made to move.
Marching in the streets of Boston today to protest a planned quote-unquote free speech rally in Boston Common. And joining me now by phone from Boston is Martha Babinger, reporter for WMUR. I'm also going to bring in Sarah Kinsey and Richard Painter in a minute, but let's go to you first, to our reporter first. What are you seeing on the ground there? We've seen a little bit of skirmishers. How big are those crowds?
The crowds are very big, Joy, and they're quite joyful, if you don't mind me saying so. I'm right next to a marching band right now. There are people dancing in the streets. I see a lot of excitement about the number of people who've come out, in their words, to combat hate.
And the crowds that we are seeing, you know, we're hearing that it could be as many as 20,000 people. Would you say that the balance is mostly free speech protesters or mostly antis?
I haven't even gotten to the Common yet. The counter-protesters started about 2 miles out near a community college in Boston, and they are marching to the Common. They're going pretty slowly because it is a really big throng, and given that there may be 20,000 or more of them, I think the police are confident in saying that they way outnumber the folks who originally organized the free speech rally.
And do you know, just from hearing on the ground, if there are plans for any of these sort of explicit white nationalist organizations, the Proud Boys and the others, to show up at these rallies?
We've heard that they will be here, but I haven't seen them yet. We certainly have a strong contingent of the Antifa, the anti-fascist folks who are here also. Police there are 500 of them who are prepared to shut the rally down if we do see any violence, but I think there are some people who may be here to make a stand.
Let me bring in, thank you very much to Martha Babinger from WMUR. Let me bring in Sarah and Richard. Sarah, you know, you talk a lot about sort of the authoritarian societies and the way that they kind of devolve. Do you see after Charlottesville a kind of, I don't know, sort of a hopeful sign that the sort of the majority is fighting back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been clarity. I think people finally see that, yes, this is as bad as it you know, seemed to be, that yes, Trump really does believe these things, and that we have to fight back, that we have to protect each other because the government is not going to protect us. We're at a point where vulnerable people, marginalized people, need to be protected from Trump and from his violent backers and from these policies. So I'm very glad to see the massive turnout in Boston today. I'm grateful to them. I think that that's the direction we need to be heading, and I think it's also important to note that in authoritarian states or states that become authoritarian, this type of mass protest is often what turns the tide. So I encourage it, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, and Richard Painter, you know, you've been scorching Donald Trump and the alt-right for these many months as they have risen in prominence leading up to Charlottesville. Do you see, ironically enough, a hopeful sign in the sort of splendid isolation of the American president?
Absolutely, I do. I, as a Republican, a Christian, and an American, am going to take a very firm stance against racism and bigotry. Millions of other Americans are going to do so as well. And I heard that last panel of yours on the so-called Evangelical Council, and I got to say, if this president wants to find out about traditional Christian values, he can walk right across the street to that little yellow church called the Church of the Presidents, where the presiding bishop is an African-American who is a hero to many in the civil rights movement. The church stands for the right of gay people to be married just like other people, because that's the Christian thing to do, the right of women to make their own medical decisions about reproductive choice, for protection of the environment, for social justice. Millions of American Christians are angry at the perversion of our faith by those who purport to read the Bible, who purport to politicize our faith purely for political gain. To win elections. And then I hear preachers. I just heard on your last panel a preacher who thinks he's an economist who's going to attribute to Donald Trump 1 million jobs that were created either by the private sector or for the economic policies of the Obama administration.
Yeah.
The entire thing is a joke for the Republican Party. Continue to kowtow to these people who do not stand for traditional American values, don't stand for Christian values, and certainly don't stand for democracy.
And Sarah, you know, as you know, there's been the use of evangelical, a version of it, even in Russia, even by Vladimir Putin. This is part of the game, right? It's sort of co-opting a certain segment of the faithful.
Yeah, I mean, there have been explicit ties and all sorts of cultivation between extremist, religious groups in Russia and extremists in the United States. But I do think it's important to note that Russia is exploiting something that is already there. As past commentators have noted, this ultra-right evangelical movement has been building steadily since the 1980s, and the GOP has embraced it. And I think it's because, it's gotten to a point that they really need to turn away, those members of their coalition who are violent, who are racist, and who are against democratic principles. Yeah. And so, hopefully they will do so.
Well, let me finish this up with a poll for our viewers. I did a poll on my Twitter feed. Will Donald Trump ever attack Steve Bannon on Twitter? 40% of you said definitely. More than 5,400 of you voted. 60% said nope, he's scared of him. And that is what is winning so far. Keep voting if you like. And I'll follow up on Twitter with you guys. Martha Bebinger of WMUR in Boston, thank you very much. Sarah Kendzior and the great Richard Painter. Always great to talk to you guys. And now I'm going to hand it off to my good friend and sister, Alex Witt, for more coverage of what's happening in Boston.
For which I thank you so much, Joy Reid. Excellent coverage the last couple of hours. Everybody, as we take you right now to the heart of Boston, that is one big march. They had expected thousands. They didn't know how many thousands. 15,000 was a preliminary estimate. Now they're pushing the number 20,000 people, all hoping to convene there in a peaceful demonstration. They are protesting there at the Boston Commons area. It was the so-called free speech rally. The organizers say they want to highlight the importance of the threats to free speech. Counter-protesters are saying they reject the positions of the far-right activists. There you see my colleague NBC's Garrett Hake. He's in Boston with more of this. Garrett, I know that you've been speaking with counter-protesters this morning. What are you hearing?
Hey, Alex, yeah, we're right in the middle of it here. The counter-protesters have been marching about 2 miles from their gathering place to Boston Common, where they're going to meet up with this original event, this free speech rally that so many of them feel like is a hate speech rally. A lot of folks out here are frustrated about this. They feel like these are issues they've been dealing with in society for years and years. And then last week, the events in Charlottesville just really crystallized the need to be here. This is Casimir, who's one of the counter-protesters here we've been walking with for a while. Why was it important for you to come out here? You said it has to do with your family, too.
Yes, it's family to promote what we haven't seen in the world. Well, here in the U.S. especially is love. And I think as a father and as a husband, and I felt like it was my duty and responsibility to be here to show the other side that hate will not win. If you look behind you and you feel like behind me, you will see that we are stronger together and we are better when we promote love and togetherness.
And we've had probably 5,000 to 10,000 people here. It's hard to tell exactly how big the crowd is just because we've been moving this whole time. But it's young, it's old, it's diverse. I mean, what do you make when you look around at the faces of the people who are out here with us today?
Everyone's just smiling. Everyone, you can see love in their face. They look at me, they don't see color, they don't see race, they don't see how short I am, they don't see how tall I am. So the idea is that everyone came together here. We're chanting, we're dancing, there's music, and that's what you see, and
where is
the counterpart, to think that, they're going to spread hate and make us believe that it's okay in this day and age, 2017. We have to do this. It's sad. I mean, there's more to be done, and again, and that's why I'm here, because I feel like, it's my responsibility, to show support for the freedom of the world.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
So, Alex, we're getting close to Boston Common here. That's where the counter-protest will meet the actual protest here. So while we've had this party atmosphere here so far today, this is the moment that has Boston police a little bit nervous. Something like 500 officers who are out here deployed to try to make sure that this counter-protest, which is definitely going to dwarf whatever free speech rally ends up happening on the Boston Common, to make sure that these two sides, if they can't get along, they can at least stay on opposite sides of this park and that we don't have violence and we don't have any problems like what we saw in Charlottesville last week.
Yeah, Garrett, before we let you go, just quickly, are you seeing anybody in the counter demonstration with which you are walking? Is anybody carrying anything that looks like weapons, sticks, batons, anything, shields, anything like that that you could use to deflect any attacks down the road or instigate them for that matter?
No, in fact, Alex, the police have been really active on this point. They even confiscated the pole to our boom mic to make sure that we didn't have anything that could be used as a stick or as a weapon or anything like that. They've used a couple of sort of choke points in this march to keep an eye out for signs that might have big long sticks and things like that. So the Boston police are being very proactive in trying to make sure that that kind of situation doesn't evolve when these two groups eventually meet.
As you said, 500 of them Boston strong, that's for sure, and they are on it this day. Thank you very much, Garrett Hake. We'll certainly check in with you again. Joining me right now on the phone is Evan Allen of the Boston Globe. Evan, with a welcome to you. Tell me what you're seeing and where you are.
Sure. I'm at an entrance point to the rally itself. So I am surrounded both by people who came for the Freedom Rally and by counter protesters. So as you can probably hear behind me, there's a lot of chanting. There's
rerouting so that there would be a smooth transition for traffic. And my sense is that the Boston Police Department is on top of this. Fortunately, we had an opportunity to prepare, unlike what happened in Charlottesville. So not yet. I mean, the traffic is moving in a regular fashion. There's and it looks okay from where I'm at, which is just slightly on the outskirts of inner city downtown. I'm at the Rotary, and I'm 10 minutes from where the rally is.
Okay, so that's good. It would seem that Boston police have things under control, and that's good to hear at this point. What are you most concerned about coming from this day in a real practical sense for the city of Boston, for your community there?
My sense is, my concern is that the fringe elements will not inadvertently catalyze what can be a very peaceful protest. In other words, you've got the free speech people here, wink, wink. They're doing what they're doing, and it's my concern, and you know, this is the concern of the law enforcement people that I spoke with, that what are affectionately referred to as the wingnuts, that the wingnuts will not have an opportunity to provoke in the counter demonstration. In other words, this needs to be a demonstration as a witness to the country that we can be, as Martin Luther King said, we can disagree without being disagreeable. And that's got to be the operational sort of understanding. We disagree on some things, but we're not going to be disagreeable, and we're not going to be violent.
Okay, so you're just a few minutes away from getting to where you are bound, which means we will get to see you and talk with you about this in depth and further issues all related to this in just a little bit. Reverend Eugene Rivers,
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Safe travels for the rest of your journey. Right now I'm joined by Richard Painter, former chief White House ethics lawyer under George W. Bush. Thank you for joining me again this weekend. It was good to talk with you last weekend as everything was erupting. But give me a sense of your thoughts, how this all plays out, politically speaking and otherwise, within the Trump administration, sir.
Well, what we are seeing is that the people of Boston are coming together, Christians, Muslims, Jews, all coming together, black and white, to oppose racism and bigotry in America. And that's what you're seeing in the Boston Common. The racists far outnumbered by those who stand for traditional American values. President Trump now has a choice. He is going to have to do a complete 180-degree turn. He is going to have to repent of his sins of racism and bigotry and greed. And he's going to have to do that fast. It better be faster than St. Paul on the road to Damascus, or he's going to be gone. His support is eroding fast. We're not going to stand for this in the United States. I've been a Republican for 30 years. We are going to not only remove the alt-right from this party, but the so-called Christian right, which doesn't stand for Christian values, which seeks to politicize our faith. We are going to go back to traditional American values of the party of Abraham Lincoln. And we are going to respect civil rights in this country. And there's going to be no more of the alt-right, the Nazi Party, the Ku Klux Klan, the far Christian right, or any of the rest of them. This is it. So, this is the end of the road for that wing of the Republican Party. So,
Richard, I appreciate the enthusiasm with which you say this, but two questions to you. Do you really think that Donald Trump will do, as you're calling for, a 180-degree turn? And if you do, might that have been made easier by the departure of Steve Bannon?
Well, I think it would be made easier by the departure of Steve Bannon, but that's his choice. I mean, he's a businessman. You can turn around a failing business, but you need to have a strategy. And at this point, that's the only strategy. He needs to repent and turn around. He has encouraged racism in America. The alt-right is a neo-fascist movement. Those who defend the alt-right need to be removed from the United States government. He needs to stand up for civil rights, for affirmative action, which actually was a Republican program during Reconstruction to help those who were burdened by the legacy of slavery. We need to go back to traditional Republican values in our party and in the United States. If the Republican Party doesn't do that, we're going to go the way of the Whigs.
So, Richard, if you talk to someone within the Trump administration, particularly those in communications, they will say the president has made statements. He has condemned, whether or not it happened right away or 48 hours later, he's condemned neo-Nazis, KKK, the alt-right movement that way, white nationalists. Why is that not getting out there? Is it the way he said it? Does it seem disingenuous? I mean, what is the lack of synapse here? What's not clicking?
Well, first of all, he's saying one thing one day, another thing the next. Second of all, he has people in this administration who are affiliated with the alt-right. Sebastian Gorka wore a neo-Nazi medal from a neo-Nazi Hungarian organization that sympathized with the Nazis during World War II. He wore that to the inaugural ball. That kind of person has no role anywhere in the United States government, much less in the White House. There are others as well who are affiliated with the alt-right. The Mercer money, which funded a lot of this, there needs to be a thorough investigation of that. We need to clean house in the Republican Party. And as I say, we're going to have to do this very quickly, or we're going to go the way of the Whigs. They fell into demise because of the inability to deal with the slavery question. America is a country for all, black, white, Muslim, Jews, Christians, everybody. And we don't talk about Western civilization versus Eastern anymore. We are a country for everyone, a country where people are respected for who they are and where everyone has an opportunity. And that's what the Republican Party needs to stand for.
And Richard, do you think it is enough for the numerous, if not overwhelming majority of Republicans right now in elected office who are distancing themselves from the Trump administration? Is that enough to, as you say, save the Republican Party from going the way of the Whigs?
They need to distance themselves from the policies of the Trump administration. The attack on our affirmative action programs in our state universities that's being launched by the Justice Department. The inability to protect our planet from destruction. I mean, what kind of conservative can't conserve the planet? I mean, we need to go back to the values of Teddy Roosevelt and even Richard Nixon, who created the Environmental Protection Agency. So we need to see some action out of members of Congress, not just words, but action to support traditional American values and individual liberty in our country, and that's not what we're getting. And if they don't do it, they're going to get thrown out.
All right, Richard Painter, former chief White House ethics lawyer for the George W. Bush administration. Sir, thank you so much for your insights. I appreciate that. And as Richard was saying, action, well, we're certainly seeing action on the streets of Boston as many protesters and counter-protesters are making their way to the Boston Common, a cultural and geographical epicenter of the city of Boston. We're going to take a short break, everybody, and keep our eye on things for you and be right back here on MSNBC Live.
AM Joy, you are looking at live pictures from Boston, where thousands of anti-racism protesters are marching ahead of a so-called free speech rally that's expected to draw the kind of white supremacist and alt-right presence that we saw on display in Charlottesville last week. Officials in Boston say they have a plan in place, including more than 500 police officers, in case tensions erupt into violence. Those tensions were heightened this week thanks to the President of the United States, who in a moment that was stunning, even by Trump standards, went off script at Trump Tower to defend the white nationalists in Charlottesville and to equate their actions with those of the anti-racism activists who oppose them.
Not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Trump's words prompted Mitt Romney, former governor of Massachusetts, side of today's rally, to demand that Trump, quote, acknowledge that he was wrong, apologize, state forcefully and unequivocally that racists are 100% to blame for the murder and violence in Charlottesville, testify that there is no conceivable comparison or moral equivalency between the Nazis and the counter-protesters who were outraged to see fools parading in Nazi flag, Nazi armband, and the Nazi salute. But no words will ever be enough for the mother of the woman who was killed by one of the suspected bannermen of that Nazi flag. Heather Heyer's mother, Susan Bro, doesn't want to hear an apology or anything else from Donald Trump.
I'm not talking to the president now. I'm sorry. After what he said about my child, and it's not that I saw somebody else's tweets about him. I saw an actual clip of him at a press conference equating the protesters like Ms. Heyer with the KKK and the white supremacists.
And Trump's defense of neo-Nazis and white supremacists will also come as no comfort to DeAndre Harris, the 20-year-old assistant special ed teacher who survived a beating at their hands and who, as the New York Daily News reports, is still receiving hate messages as he recovers from his extensive injuries. And joining me now, our Daily Beast columnist, Howard Dean. I'm sorry, he's not a Daily Beast columnist, former Vermont governor and Democratic National Committee chair, Howard Dean. Patrice Cullors, founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. Leah Wright-Rigueur, assistant professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and Msnbc political contributor David Johnson. Howard Dean, you can be any Dean you want. We're gonna let you be who you are. I'm gonna come to you first, though, Leah, because Donald Trump got he was fully, he was taken apart all across the board, except for a couple of groups, white evangelicals, pretty much stood by him. But he got huge praise from white nationalists. Some of whom called him the most honest president since Washington. He's drawn their active praise. In a normal presidency, this would cause a complete rethink, right? But with Trump, why do you suppose it doesn't?
So it doesn't, because this is who he's been, this is who he is, this is what he thrives on, right? So he is someone who has really just kind of appealed to these ideas. We're in a moral moment right now. This is a moment where it should be clear as day. Any Republican any president, doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, whatever, knows that this is something that you're supposed to speak out about. But this is a guy who is essentially, right, president of the internet comments, right? The comment section of the internet. And this is who he is. This is a man who does not have moral courage, who does not have moral decency, and is not the conscience of our nation, and doesn't have the ability to speak to the conscience of our nation.
Yeah, and Governor Dean, a lot of people have been praising Mitt Romney for coming out with this forceful statement on Facebook against Donald Trump. But I have to recall that Donald Trump had already gone after Muslims, called Mexicans rapists, gone after women, gone after former Miss Universe contestants, you name it. He had offended everyone. When Mitt Romney went and begged for a job at a dinner in November of 2016, Donald Trump had already been doing that. The Access Hollywood video had happened, and Mitt Romney was perfectly happy to sit down with him and eat dinner. Do you think Republicans are getting praise, undeserved praise, for only being willing to name Donald Trump and stand up to him when it's actual Nazis that he is excusing?
Well, we don't know what went on at that dinner, but I think Mitt Romney came out of that dinner looking pretty terrible, and I think the lesson is don't meet with Donald Trump if you don't want somewhere down the line. You don't want to look pretty bad. This guy is a guy who has no moral character. But the interesting thing about this, Joy, is I think this may be the moment for Trump that last weekend. I think today, in the 2018 elections, if you vote for a Republican, you're supporting Donald Trump. This has now become a referendum. If you want to vote for a racist in the White House, then you better vote for Republicans. But if you want to vote for the Democrats and really have change, that's where I think America is going. And I think there's a lot more decent Americans than there are the kind of people who supported the folks in Charlottesville. And Trump is in the minority, and that's what the polling shows. So I think this may be the moment that turns America away from the Republican Party, which, frankly, long before Donald Trump was dog whistling race, gay rights, immigrants, and Muslims.
Yeah. I think, Patrice, one of the reasons we wanted to have you here, because as a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, you have heard all of the counterattacks against Black Lives Matter, the claims that it's Black Lives Matter that's a hate group, that the Black Lives Matter is sort of somehow a black equivalent of the Klan, and you heard some of that again after Charlottesville. How do you respond to that when you had a woman who was marching with Black Lives Matter killed by white supremacists in that city?
I always think it's disturbing when people try to equate Black Lives Matter with the KKK. It's absolutely ridiculous. Black Lives Matter has always been an organization and now a movement that is about peace, that is about nonviolence. And more importantly, Black Lives Matter is about gaining civil and human rights. And the KKK, neo-Nazi groups, are about taking away people's rights.
And, Jason, let's just, if we can show the posters, you've seen a sort of a climb down among even the people who claim this was all just free speech and save the monuments, et cetera. On the right side of your screen is the Unite the Right poster that invited people to that rally. It was hard to mistake what you were coming to with the Nazi air, the air symbols on the sides, all of the Nazi sort of regalia that's all over that poster, as well as the people listed there, all of whom are known white nationalists and proud white nationalists. And then on the left, you have the rally for the Boston free speech rally, where they tried to put a lot of American flags and sort of change the nature of what the protest was. Do you think that there is any way to separate the two?
I mean, Joy, they're going to attempt a rebranding, but, it doesn't matter. You can call it McDonald's, you can call it McDonald's. It's still a nasty hamburger, right? Like, and we all know.
No free McDonald's for you?
Yeah,
you just ruined it.
I'm done. I'm done with McDonald's. But yeah, like, they can't rebrand this. They can't suddenly change what this is about. And I think what's important, sort of looking forward, as someone else mentioned, like, now the Republican Party, it might have been a joke before, but now the Republican Party is essentially connected with terrorists, not just white supremacists, but terrorists. And that is a problem that this president has laid at their shoulders. And the only way that he can fix it, and I don't think that he will, is he needs to not just say, hey, Nazis are bad. He needs to say, I don't want your vote. We don't want your support. If you were a politician, you found out a bunch of pedophiles supported you. If you found out a bunch of murderers said, hey, I like that guy as a murderer, you would say, I don't want your vote and support. And until the Republican Party says, not just that Trump was wrong, but we do not want your support. We don't want David Dukes in our party. They're going to have a problem no matter how many different ways white nationalists try and rebrand themselves.
And, Leah, we can't get inside Donald Trump's head. We don't want to psychoanalyze him on TV. But this is a guy whose father did get arrested at a Klan rally in 1927. Like, that actually happened, right? And that's not just me making that up. There's records that reveal, and there's an article, I think Philip Bump wrote that particular one. He does have a family history of a certain type. When Republicans try to argue against Democrats, they immediately go to Robert Byrd. They say, Robert Byrd was in the Klan. Right. Robert Byrd was in the Klan. Right. Donald Trump's own personal history, not just the father's affiliations, but the discrimination against black people in housing, the birther stuff, they feel is off limits. Is the Republican Party capable of dealing with even Donald Trump's own personal history, and do they have to do that before they can separate from him?
So they absolutely have to do it, right? Because what Donald Trump has done is rip the mask of civility off of this idea of the Republican Party being distinct or being different or not, capitulating to white identity politics. We see that this is a myth, and part of what the party has to do, right, is, the first step is acknowledging the problem and calling it out. So kudos to the people who have called it out. But then the next step is, are you endorsing it in other ways, right, in tacit ways? Are you, say, signing off on all of this stuff that Donald Trump is doing, right, including, say, personal history, including not acknowledging the role that you have played in allowing to get to this point? So I think there is something there, something deeply important that we have to acknowledge about Trump and this kind of ties to the GOP.
Yeah, I mean, Jason, I imagine that if you know, Barack Obama had a history that was similar to the family history. I mean, he had to do a whole speech because his pastor, who is not a blood relative, gave a sermon that he wasn't even there for. And so the idea that Donald Trump has not had to address himself to his own family history, what does that say to you?
Well, it says that a lot of Americans are perfectly fine with a bigot as long as they think he's going to provide them with a job. And that's what Donald Trump sold himself on. I mean, I was never, Joy, I was never a believer in the economic anxiety argument, but I think that the real challenge, the reason that Trump has gotten into so much trouble is people were willing to deal with the sexism and the misogyny and the violence in his background and the corrupt businesses if they thought he was going to get something done. But now it's looking like he actually can't get anything done, and he's a bigot. And that's why his base, while that 35% are never going to leave him, all the other Republicans on the side are starting to say, you know what, look, if you can't get anything done, I don't need to see riots on the television every other weekend anyway. And that's the real challenge. The fear that I think Democrats should have is that if Donald Trump ever somehow wakes up in the morning and starts to accomplish things policy-wise, he'll go right back to success.
And I mean, Howard Dean, you took some heat for once saying that, you know, Democrats need to start to appeal to the guys with Confederate flags in their pickups. But we know what the Confederate flag means. We know what those guys mean by displaying that, right? For Democrats, how do you respond to this if Democrats are still, in a sense, pining for some of those same people?
Well, that was 12 years ago that I said that, and I meant it at the time. I think at this point the Confederate flag has essentially been subsumed by the Nazi flag. And I would take be a little different from what Leah said. I think the voters already know what Trump's brand is. I mean, the Republican Party is essentially an old white party. That's who votes for them. Our party is the party that looks like the future of America. Look, I'm not trying to say the Democrats are perfect, and we've got a lot of work to do. But the truth is, we know this battle is the battle for the 10 or 15% of the people who voted for Donald Trump, who are basically decent people who wanted change and now are disgusted by what's going on. That is what I think is going to make the difference, and that is where Trump has damaged the Republican Party. And I do not believe the Republicans can recover between now and November 2018.
And Patrice, I'm going to give you the last word here. You've had a lot of people on the right now complaining and sort of whining that social media is kicking Nazis off of their platforms and not giving them their free speech. I guess this rally is there to address that, what they see as the closing of the door to their voices online. What do you say to those who are rallying in Boston today for what they say is free speech, but which includes free speech for outfits like the Daily Stormer?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that free speech should be coupled with hate speech that leads to people's death. And that's what we're seeing. This idea that people are allowed to go out, spew hatred, and then use that hatred to kill people, abuse people, humiliate people, is totally unacceptable. And we've seen the ACLU, after, you know, they came out saying they'd side with white supremacists, they've come out now saying, actually, we're not going to side with white supremacists. And I think we need to be looking at how we challenge what we think is free speech and how it's being spoken about in the streets and how it's impacting people's everyday lives.
Leah Reitberger, Howard Dean, Patrice Cullors, Jason Johnson, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And coming up, some Nazis are bummed out because they're being picked on. Too bad. So sad. That's next.
To work on a safe pathway forward, they've agreed to specific rules for a rally on Boston Common. If anything gets out of hand, we will shut it down.
Despite a heavy police presence today, many in Boston are worried that fighting could break out between protesters holding a free speech rally and counter-protesters. Even some of the rally's original headliners dropped out in fear of a possible riot. Vice Media co-founder and Trump supporter Gavin McInnes and the alt-right internet troll who goes by the name Baked Alaska both backed out, so that they're afraid they may be labeled white supremacists or caught up in an orchestrated riot put together by the quote-unquote establishment to discredit the right. McInnes prefers the term Western chauvinists, as his group Proud Boys describes itself. And joining me now, Republican strategist Christopher Metzler, Sarah Kendzior, journalist and scholar of authoritarian states, former White House chief ethics lawyer Richard Painter, and MSNBC political analyst David Corn. Chris, you know, I giggle a little bit when I read these because they want to be rebranded. They don't want to be called white nationalists anymore. They want to be called, what is it, Western chauvinists. Chris Cantwell. Let's play a little bit of his interview on Vice magazine. This is one of the, are we calling them Western chauvinists now? Let's listen to Chris Cantwell on Vice.
Capable. I'm carrying a pistol. I go to the gym all the time. I'm trying to make myself more capable of violence. I'm here to spread ideas, talk, in the hopes that somebody more capable will come along and do that.
So you're the true nonviolent protesters.
I'm not even saying we're nonviolent. I'm saying that we didn't aggress. We did not initiate force against anybody. We're not nonviolent. We'll kill these people if we have to.
And then he cried. He cried because he was afraid of getting arrested. This is a guy who used to threaten police when he was in New Hampshire, openly threatened police. There are now warrants out for his arrest, Boston Globe reports. Officials from the Virginia Commonwealth Attorney's Office said that Cantwell is wanted for illegal use of gases and injury by caustic agent or explosive felonies. And here's his old mugshot, if y'all want to show that. You know, there he is, a guy who thinks that he is superior to you and me.
Yes.
There he is, Christopher Cantwell. At least he's not crying in that photo. What do you make of the attempt to rebrand this as not hate speech, but free speech?
Well, first of all, there is no free speech issue involved here. What's the free speech? There is no free speech issue. In addition to which, I think it's very important that as a Republican and from the Republican Party, guys like him get the hell out of the party. Okay? If we don't want your vote, we don't want you in the party.
But if the President of the United States, who is a member of your party, will not say that, then how can the party lead itself?
It can't. Because if, in fact, the president is unwilling to say that, then it doesn't matter what other Republicans are saying. The president hasn't said it, and he needs to say it. It's very simple. I don't know what's so hard.
And Sarah, you know, Donald Trump clearly believes that he derives a benefit from not angering these people. But if you look at who's still speaking at this Boston free speech rally, it includes Kyle Chapman, Joe Biggs, a guy named Shiva Ayyadurai, and congressional candidate Samson Ratchiopi. This was their list. A lot of right-wing extremists still speaking. You had some pull out because they said they were afraid of violence. But what does it say to you that the President of the United States feels that he cannot alienate these people?
I mean, I think in some respects, it's just a sign that he's pathetic. He needs adoration wherever he can find it. I mean, this is also why he sympathizes with the Confederacy and, you know, why he might want monuments to racist losers to, you know, last despite, you know, them deserving it. But, you know, I think at the heart, Trump's goal wasn't just to be the president. It was to build a movement. It was to destabilize the country. It was to put forth an extremist ideology and to mainstream it. And so, you know, he's perfectly content to continue doing that, regardless of, you know, how much criticism it causes and how much pain it causes for people like the mother of Heather Meyer.
And, you know, Richard, you know, to be fair, let's read. The Anti-Defamation League did put out a statement on their blog about the Boston rally today and its speakers, and they said, unlike Charlottesville, the Boston event, as currently planned, is not a white supremacist gathering. It's been organized under the auspices of the alt-light, which embraces civic nationalism, rather than the alt-right, which advocates white nationalism. Do you think that this is just a climb down by some of these people who were proud to call themselves alt-right before? This guy Baked Alaska, who pulled out, used to be proudly alt-right, and now he wants to be Western chauvinist. What does it say to you that even some of these extremists themselves are sort of trying to walk back?
Well, the alt-right is a neo-fascist and racist movement, and that needs to be acknowledged. Right there on Boston Common is a brass relief by Augustus St. Gaudens of the African-American soldiers who fought for the Union, for the United States of America in the Civil War. Those are the traditional values of the Republican Party that I've been a member of for 30 years. We are going to be a party of inclusion, and we are going to drive these people from the Republican Party. It is not just about the neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan. It is about the alt-right. It is about the so-called religious right who couldn't read a Bible if they tried. It is about the extremists who've sought to take over our party for 30 years. And they are going to be out. Yes, there's a civil war in the Republican Party, but all of these people are going to be out, or the Republican Party is going to cease to exist. We're the party of Abraham Lincoln. We are the party of inclusion. These people are going to be gone.
And, you know, David, there has been this battle. I mean, the Democrats went through this as well. The Democrats were home to the, you know, the far sort of racist right for, you know, 150 years and had to they expelled them, you know, not even by on purpose. You know, once they passed civil rights legislation and these people needed somewhere to go, they've wound up in the GOP. How hard is it, though, going to be for Republicans? I'll ask you and then I'll ask Chris, you know, how hard is it going to be to do that when you still do have people who may not consider themselves to be hardcore white nationalists, but who do things like this? You have a guy who plays for the Orioles named Adam Jones, who played in Boston back in May, and says he was called the N-word just by regular fans, right? You have all of these stories of people who sort of use bigotry in their daily lives. Boston is known to have had a history of some real racial ugliness. So there's some people who, they may not publicly identify as white nationalists, but they still feel that way. If those people are attracted to your political party, how do you get them out?
Well, it's not just that they've been attracted to the political party, the Republican Party. It's that the Republican Party has used that as one of their key leverages to gain power, going back to the Southern strategy that Richard Nixon used to take advantage of the civil rights backlash, down in the South.
So, sorry to cut you off, David, but I'm going to let you finish, but I just want to let everyone to know that that's the counter-protest. It's pretty huge in Boston right now. Go on, David.
Oh, thanks. And, through the birther movement, Mitt Romney put out a great statement this week, but you know what? In 2012, he went after Donald Trump for his endorsement when Trump was known, politically mostly as a racist birther. And then he embraced Trump afterwards. And then he tried to get a job with Trump. The Republican Party, basically has made common cause with birtherism and racism for many, many years. Richard Painter hasn't, and there's a part of the party that does hail back to the Abraham Lincoln days and ideals. But the party, at its core, I think, and I'm sorry to say this to Richard, has moved away from that and has been playing with race for so long that I think it's part of the DNA. I don't know how you get rid of it at this point.
I want to let you answer that, Richard, first, and then I'm going to come to Chris on that same question. If the party for this many decades, through right-wing talk radio, through some of the Fox News content, through, the birther movement, and through sort of even just suborning Donald Trump, has cultivated these voters for so long, is it salvageable? Is there a way to walk all that back?
Parties can change. The Democratic Party for years ran Williams Jennings Bryan, who didn't even believe in evolution, for President of the United States. And many of these people who are racist were former Democrats, and Richard Nixon decided he wanted to bring them in for political reasons. And then, unfortunately, Ronald Reagan furthered that movement, the so-called religious right, which, as I say, has absolutely nothing to do with Christian principles, was brought in for political. We can get these people out. They have driven respectable people out of the Republican Party. We can go back to being the party of Abraham Lincoln, at the party of Teddy Roosevelt, who did a lot to protect the environment. And we could be a constructive party, and we're going to do that because these people are out the door, and this is only the beginning. They are out the door.
I have to salute Richard's optimism there, and I hope he's right.
We're out of time, but I want to give Chris the last word on that. Is it possible to do?
It is possible to do, but here's the thing. What's happening is that we have allowed the party to be hijacked by this kind of nonsense, and if we don't move away from that, as a party, we can forget it.
Yeah. Christopher Metzler, Sarah Kendzior, or David Corn, thank you guys so much for being here. Richard's going to be back later in the show. And coming up, Donald Trump's evangelical board is standing by him, except for one member. And he joins me next to explain why. More Ames after the break.
Morning Joe speaks truth to power.